Hello, everybody. This is the third of three videos about the Old English epic poem Beowulf. The magical number three. One is a great number, but it's not very dramatic. Two things side by side take on a kind of self-enclosed mirror relationship where the two elements become entangled into a linked pair. This is the relationship that the Grendel sequence and the Grendel's mother sequence would have with one another, if that were the whole poem. But the Beowulf poet gives us a third act, Beowulf's climactic fight with the dragon, and this third part opens the story up into that charmed three-part structure. Maybe it's because three things together are bound together by a clear structure, but there's also enough slippage in the relationships among the three parts that a space is created for dynamic interpretive engagement. Four things is too many. You lose the sense of structure, but three gives you enough structure to satisfy the part of the brain that likes structure, but also provides enough ambiguity and possibility to make the whole complex pop out into three dimensions. This is very much what happens in Beowulf, where the third part of the poem expands the triangle dramatically in space and time, taking us across the sea to Beowulf's home country of Geatland, and also, in a way that underscores the Beowulf poet's obsession with the inevitability of death and disaster, forward in time to Beowulf's death. Together, the three parts of Beowulf map provocatively onto the classic narrative structure of beginning, middle, and end, as well as onto the existential structure of human reality, birth, life, and death. As we discussed in relation to Grendel's mother, the figure of Grendel's mother herself, as well as the swamp where she dwells, suggests imagery related to birth. The dragon, correspondingly, is a sublime symbol of death. Dragons are so cool. What is it about dragons? Why are they the ultimate fantasy creature? They're not exactly monsters in the Grendel and Grendel's mother sense. They're more like fierce animals. They are part of the natural order of things in a way that monsters are not. They have a nobility about them, even when they act in evil and destructive ways. The dragon's predation conveys a sense that the people the dragon kills have brought their doom upon themselves through their own character flaws. The dragon is a quasi-divine entity. While a monster tends to be defined as subhuman, a dragon is superhuman, an image of all the forces of weather, nature, gods, cosmos, life, and death that human reality is always surrounded by and helpless within. Of course, one of the uncanny things about dragons is that so many different human cultures from so many different parts of the globe seem to share a concept of a flying lizard of sublime doom. Is it because they found dinosaur bones and tried to make sense of them? Is it because dragons are one of the oldest memes in human culture and that they go back 50,000 years to the time when all human beings shared an East African culture before their diasporatic dispersal across the globe? Is it because the idea of dragonness is somehow embedded in the architecture of human neuroanatomy? Whatever it is, the storytellers who concocted the Beowulf legend intuited that it had to be a dragon that killed Beowulf. He couldn't be killed by some lesser monster, Grendel's uncle or something like that. Only a divine animal like a dragon can be worthy of the accomplishment of killing Beowulf. And of course, Beowulf gives as good as he gets, so that Beowulf and the dragon both die side by side in a visual image that the poet presents as a subtle allusion to the idea that Beowulf and the dragon share a common strength, a common mythic dimension, a common superhuman status. The dragon sequence of Beowulf is an epic climax for its tale of adventure, but a reader will also notice that this part of the poem also becomes increasingly convoluted by interspersed tales consisting of a dizzying cast of interrelated warrior tribes, intergenerational feuds and grievances, marriages intended to heal old wounds but that instead erupt into bloodshed, and a tangled web of cross-currents of death and dissolution. The greatest achievement of Beowulf's life, it turns out, is not defeating a trio of monsters, but achieving a stable peace for the Geats through the example of his strength, reliability, and goodwill. Of course, the dragon himself is a clear representation of the conquering serpent of death and chaos, which always threatens to put an end to whatever brief windows of peace and security the people in the Beowulf verse manage to achieve. The dragon of Beowulf is rich in symbolic significations. He is the incarnation of the devil's hellish rage. He represents the deadly attachment to the acquisition of wealth. It's almost like the dragon is called into existence by the gold hoard as its emblem, the monster of greed and paranoia and materialism that gold inspires in men's hearts, and a source of so much war and woe in human life. But the dragon also seems to have a personal significance for Beowulf himself, as if he is the shape of Beowulf's own death. Beowulf goes to the dragon with a premonition that he will die, and it's almost as if the closer he gets to dying, the more human he becomes as a character. Throughout most of the poem, Beowulf serves as a kind of puppet for mouthing platitudes about bravery and nobility. But the closer he gets to the dragon, the more introspective and individualized his voice becomes. Earlier on in this part of the poem, we learn for the first time that when he was a child, everyone thought that Beowulf was a weakling and a nerd. This strange detail about Beowulf's past helps to make him seem less one-dimensional and more fully human. Throughout this section, we also hear the story of how Beowulf lived his life, how he became king of the Geats, and how he ruled with decency and honor despite living in a narrative cosmos steeped in treachery, vindictiveness, and brutality. When the dragon emerges to threaten his people, he resolves to face the dragon, just as he had resolved to fight the last two monsters. Whereas in the first two parts, Beowulf had seemed inspired by a kind of fighting spirit and an élan vital or jouissance, his determination to face the dragon is a grim choice, steeped in fatalism and a stoic embrace of the inevitability of death. His behavior is still heroic, but it's heroic on a very human scale. All human beings need to find the courage to face death, and some philosophers have speculated that it is this very act of acknowledging the fact of our own being toward death that makes us individual human beings and shapes the rest of how we live our lives. Indeed, Beowulf's most human moment may be his dying words after the dragon has delivered its fatal wound. Now is the time when I would have wanted to bestow this armor on my own son, had it been my fortune to have fathered an heir and live on in his flesh. No longer the sprightly, indomitable He-Man action figure of Acts 1 and 2, now Beowulf is just another old man, full of regrets and sad memories. He is consoled by the fact that he has been a good king, but he also knows that as soon as he dies, Geatland will be overrun with hostile pillagers who will take advantage of his death to slaughter and enslave the Geat people. As grim and hopeless as the first two parts of Beowulf often are, the final section interweaves the story of Beowulf's death with a proliferation of grim sub-stories. It might be a structural tendency of threequels that they have to turn all the dials up to 11 to amp up the narrative effects, and so the Beowulf poet loads up this section with tales of nihilistic dread and desolation. That underground gold hoard that the dragon guarded, where did it come from? We hear about it in what is often called the Lay of the Last Survivor. This part of the poem tells the story about a tribe of people who were wiped out by war, death, disease, and disaster until only one man was left. We hear this man's anguished thoughts as he reflects on the fate that has wiped away all his friends and family, as he passes the time loading up all the wealth and cultural artifacts of his dead civilization into an underground barrow to rot into oblivion. Pillage and slaughter have emptied the earth of entire peoples, and so he mourned as he moved about the world, deserted and alone, lamenting his unhappiness day and night until death's flood brimmed up in his heart. As Beowulf recaps the story of his life, he spends some time dwelling on how Hrethel, king of the Geats and Beowulf's great uncle, felt when one of his sons, Hæthcyn, killed another one of his sons, Herbeold. This passage is known as the Father's Lament. Morning after morning, he wakes to remember that his child is gone. He has no interest in living on until another heir is born in the hall, now that his firstborn has entered death's dominion forever. Alone with his longing, he lies down on his bed and sings a lament. Everything seems too large, the steadings and the field. In the main narrative, Beowulf's faithful gang of retainers desert him in his moment of greatest need, showing that even a great and beloved leader like Beowulf rarely earns the full loyalty of fickle human beings. The one retainer who stays by Beowulf's side and who helps him slay the dragon, Wiglaf, is portrayed as a heroic symbolic heir to Beowulf, but Wiglaf's bravery is not enough to cancel out the collective shame and disgrace of Beowulf's other men. Once word gets out about how cowardly and ignoble the men of Geatland were in this fight against the dragon, every other Viking tribe in the region is going to march right over to eat them alive, maybe even literally. Beowulf foresees this disaster, but at least he's heartened by the thought that his fight against the dragon has won this enormous trove of gold and treasure for his people, and he dies thinking that this is the case. The Geats go right in and start looting the barrow, but Wiglaf predicts that this treasure will never do them any good. The pile of rings he paid for at the end with his own life will go up with the flame, be furled in fire. Beowulf's hard-won treasure, it turns out, is so accursed that whoever robbed it would be guilty of wrong and grimly punished for their transgression, clasped in hell bonds in heathen shrines. And ultimately, the Geats let the ground keep that ancestral treasure, gold under gravel, gone to earth, as useless to men as it ever was. While winning gold for his people might be thought of as a lasting accomplishment in the warrior Viking world, the early Christian tradition teaches that money is the root of all evil, and that worldly riches are no hedge against eternal damnation, quite the opposite. So as someone in a vaguely Christian poem, Beowulf can't have the consolation of winning heaps of gold. But as a pagan who has never heard the message of Jesus Christ, Beowulf can't have the Christian consolation of going to heaven. The only thing that everyone knows for certain at the end of the poem is that they are all in big trouble. At Beowulf's funeral, a mourning Geat woman sums up what the Geatish people can expect now that the poem is over. She unburdened herself of her worst fears, a wild litany of nightmare and lament. Her nation invaded, enemies on the rampage, bodies in piles, slavery and abasement. Then the poet turns to look at Beowulf's funeral pyre. Heaven swallowed the smoke. Beowulf's legacy, his heroism, his kingship, his strength, his birth, life, death, and the entirety of his being goes up in smoke, along with the Geat woman's anguished words. The empty sky absorbs both the combustible emissions of Beowulf's corpse, as well as the terrified lamentations of the anonymous woman. The universe doesn't care. The pain and suffering will continue because that's all human beings can expect from the cosmos, even when things seem to be going temporarily okay. Okay, so that's depressing. But then it also makes me think of something that the American writer Saul Bellow said, which is that all literature, even when it seems depressing, is ultimately hopeful. The act of telling a story supposes that you believe in a future where your words can have an effect on people, get them to think and dream. Writers write stories down because they intuit the existence of future humans that they want to reach out to, and then, in the process of doing so, writers actually wind up creating the future itself. The strange wisdom of Beowulf teaches us both to appreciate the beautiful aspects of being alive, of having friends, of having courage and free will, while also remaining mindful of the existential limitations of human reality. It teaches us to have the courage to conquer our monsters, but it also teaches us that human reality is full of monsters that no amount of courage can help us to conquer, and to think into the strange mystery of this aspect of our human condition.